Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our last morning briefing of the Republican National Convention. I'm Margaret Lowe Smith. I'm president of Atlantic Live. We've had a pretty extraordinary week here, and thank you to those of you who have been with us on previous mornings. Before we begin, I do want to thank our underwriters who've actually made it possible for us to be here in Cleveland with you this week. They are the American Petroleum Institute's Vote for Energy project, Maker's Mark, and Sara. And on to the substance of the day. We are calling this morning's session The Road to the White House. Tonight, Donald Trump accepts the Republican nomination. Then it's on to the general election. And today we're going to talk about what the campaign will look like from here, about the search for party unity, which, as we all know, took a hit last night on the floor. We'll dive into what this means for Trump's effort to rally the base and attract enough independent Democrats to put him over the top. If you want to join the conversation on Twitter, you should use the hashtag #TheAtlanticRNC. That's the Atlantic RNC is our hashtag. And C-SPAN is here capturing the briefing, so let's get rolling and introduce our guests. We have John Brabender. He was a senior aide on former Senator Rick Santorum's 2 presidential campaigns. He actually has a second mission here in Cleveland, which goes beyond politics. He hopes to get the band Yes into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So good luck with that. Sara Fagen was White House political director for George W. Bush and is now a partner with the public affairs firm DDC. Mike DuHaime was political director of the Republican National Committee and held senior positions with George W. Bush, Senator McCain, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. He was lead strategist for Chris Christie's 2 gubernatorial campaigns and is now a partner at Mercury, a public affairs firm. Mike Murphy, Republican political consultant who most recently ran the super PAC for Jeb Bush's presidential campaign. He's advised Mitt Romney, John McCain, and many others. We are going to be joined in progress by the former national spokesperson for the Ted Cruz campaign. He's a current MSNBC political analyst, Rick Tyler, so he'll come in right in the middle. Here to lead the conversation, my colleague, Atlantic senior editor Ron Brownstein, and CBS News chief White House political correspondent, Major Garrett. Ron, Major, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Margaret mentioned that the official title of this is The Road to the White House, but I always call this event, which is my favorite of what we do at the convention, the Campaign Manager Summit, because we have some of the sharpest thinkers and strategists in the Republican Party, although I would slightly amend John Brabender to say that...
I'm not one of the sharpest?
No, slightly amend to say that the Yes album covers probably deserve a space in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's more marginal on the band.
Roger.
No, it's not.
Yeah, okay.
It's not marginal on the band.
All right,
band belongs. Absolutely.
We are in the midst of an extraordinary convention, obviously. And last night, Sara, we saw something from Ted Cruz that we probably have not seen exactly since Nelson Rockefeller in 1964 come onto the convention floor and very conspicuously and overtly not endorse the nominee. What are the implications of that for Ted Cruz, and what are the implications of that for Donald Trump and the party this fall?
It was I think the most significant moment of the convention so far and the most mishandled. Not just by the Trump campaign, but also by Ted Cruz's handlers. Because the implications for Trump, of course, are that the party remains ununified. The one person perhaps most able to unify the party, the person who came closest to being the nominee besides Trump, not only didn't endorse, but said it's okay not to vote for him, which is a pretty bold move. And that says to many conservatives, and particularly Christian conservatives, it's okay for you to sit this out. It's okay for you to vote up and down the ticket and leave that space blank. Whether he meant that or not, I think he probably did. That was the implication, and that's how it was took. But in the presidential campaign, at this stage of a contest, there is no reason, in my view, that they shouldn't have known exactly what Ted Cruz was going to say. And if Cruz was going to say anything close to what he did say, he should have been speaking on Monday night, not on Wednesday night. He overshadowed Mike Pence's speech because of this. And he probably hurt himself, Ted Cruz, probably hurt himself, at least in the short term, and then depending on the outcome of the election, potentially fatally. You know, think about it. If Donald Trump ends up losing this election by a few points, Ted Cruz is going to bear the brunt of that blame because of what happened last night.
Mike Murphy and Mike.
I fundamentally agree with that. I mean, let's try to think of it from the Cruz point of view, though, just to make the argument, which is I think they're thinking, one, we're going to run in 4 years. Two, there are two possible Trump outcomes. Trump wins, and he governs either as a train wreck or as a moderate, neither of which we Cruz people want to be linked to. We could wind up primarying him in 4 years. Second, he loses in a big pile of rubble. We don't want any connection to that. So I get the reasons for the Cruz people, as the purity candidate, that's his brand, not to endorse Trump. But actually going up there on Wednesday night, now how it got cleared, I'm with Sara on this, there are whole procedures in the convention, so this can't happen. And the Trump campaign says, as early this morning, they knew all about it, they were being magnanimous, whatever. This breaks all the rules of trying to control anything at your convention, which conventions are about control. But anyway, to go up there before Pence on the second biggest night, unscrew your head, take out a lightning bolt, and throw it right between Trump's eyes is unbelievable. And what it does is it takes the strategy of being away from Trump, which I think has some validity for Cruz as a committed conservative, and it creates a whole new debate of bad manners, of selfishness, of showboating, which even some pro-Cruz people are clearly repelled by. So I think he blew himself up, and the only question is if there's a complete Trump disaster in November, will then, in hindsight, in the all-new politics a year from now, will the purity thing be able to resuscitate
just to
it?
follow up before Major comes in, from the other side, though, what does it mean for Trump?
Well, it was interesting. I was on Today's Show with Manafort this morning, and he was saying, well, we knew, but Mr. Trump's, lets anybody speak, but it was, unfortunate, and it was kind of selfish. It was the only time I've ever seen the Trump campaign work a subtext of being a victim. Because Trump's whole shtick is he's Superman. He's bulletproof. He never apologizes. Trump, he's the caudillo. He's Juan Perón. So that was a bit of a switch up. I think there is a voter problem here. Trump really needs to get to 95, 96% of the Republicans, let alone everybody else, where he's got trouble, to be competitive. And now he's in a bit of what I'll call a dog whistle squeeze play. On one side, you got the regular Republicans, the Jeb Bushes, the George W. Bushes, the Romneys, who in a much more polite way have taken a pass on Trump. Now you've got the Christian conservatives who have the most ideological concern about Trump, because Trump doesn't have an ideological history of any credibility in our party, getting a dog whistle, it's okay not to be for Trump. So, how he gets the Republican number to 95, let alone all the other numbers, I think got harder now. Although short term, maybe there'll be a sympathy bounce.
Now, Mike and John, you've been in situations not like this, but where you've had to negotiate something and build something good out of something that could be bad. I want to ask both of you, if you were in the middle of that, do you think there was a way to negotiate this to a better place than it landed last night? And strategically, how would you have tried to approach that?
I think I wouldn't have let Ted Cruz speak, especially, as Sara said, even on Monday night, maybe Monday afternoon, maybe not. But I think not at all. If you're not going to endorse the nominee, this is the nominees' convention. That's how it works. And you just don't let him speak. So there's going to be a couple of articles saying, oh, you didn't let Ted Cruz speak. Who cares? Today we're all talking about Ted Cruz and not Mike Pence, which is a huge mistake. The Ted Cruz not speaking story would have been done a week ago and nobody would care right now. And I just think the way to negotiate it is to not negotiate it. If you're not going to endorse, you're not going to speak,
you don't get a slot.
and that's it.
John?
Yeah, my big problem is this is symptomatic that they aren't under control. They don't have things. I mean, even if they had negotiated that Cruz was going to come out with a full endorsement, I still wouldn't have done it right before your vice president pick, who's an important speech for you that night. I mean, in a regular world, I would say, look, they should initiate random drug testing because this happened. I mean, it's an absurdity that they allowed this to happen. Now, my belief is in Cruz's world, they've calculated that they believe Donald Trump is probably not going to win. They believe it's possible that he's going to implode. And I think they look at this as the Democrats did the going into a Iraq vote. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where it's going to be, did you support Trump and hold your nose as a conservative, or did you stand up for your principles? And I think Cruz is trying to look down the road and saying, I'm going to say I never deviated from.
I don't think it's going to work. I think Trump, you talk about could be a disaster. Trump could lose by 50, and the Trump voters will blame Ted Cruz. It may have nothing to do with Ted Cruz's speech, and they will blame him, and they will blame him forever for it. And Ted Cruz, has spent 6 months building Donald Trump up, and now he's ideological purity. No chance. I don't think it sticks. I agree they might have been looking at it that way.
That's what I think
But
they
I
were
don't think it
Yeah,
sticks.
because they've layered themselves with this tone of betrayal now,
Yeah.
which was unnecessary.
Right.
It was a huge bet they've made for kind of limited upside and huge potential downside.
You know, Cruz, as is his style, took this the furthest toward the most confrontational point that was possible. But if you look in Paul Ryan's speech, in Mitch McConnell's speech, in Marco Rubio's speech, none of them said a single word, zero, praising the character, temperament, or fitness
That's
for the
right.
office of Donald Trump. John Kasich isn't here. Jeb Bush isn't here. Sarah, going back to your, even Scott Walker, by the way, who
Right.
came the closest, was done with Donald Trump at the 53-second mark
Right.
of his speech last night. So what is the impact of all of this? I mean, we're not hearing the things that we usually hear from party leaders and other presidential nominees. Chris Christie obviously was very strong, Jeff Sessions, Newt Gingrich, but a large number are not embracing Trump in the way that is typical. What impact does that have?
I don't think it's going to have much impact on Donald Trump, you know, and his chances in November. He is running uphill now, you know, even on his best days, just given the electoral college map and his past gaffes and things he said. So I think the fact that the Republican Party apparatus doesn't embrace him has no bearing on the excitement around his candidacy. It probably has some bearing on people showing up and knocking on doors and making phone calls, but he's not investing in that anyway. I mean, he's clearly not building that infrastructure for his campaign. So I don't think, I mean, I was thinking about this earlier as we were, you know, we've spent a week talking about gaffe after gaffe after gaffe. This has been an embarrassing convention. There's been a lot of problems with it, but I'm not really sure at the end of the day when we leave this convention it's going to have any impact on Donald Trump's numbers, and if it does, it'll be temporary at best.
I think it'll have more impact on Cruz's numbers, potentially. I mean, I don't think he comes across looking principled. Principled thing would either have been do what Rubio and everybody else, or don't come.
Right.
What he did is he came in and he used the audience to
Yep.
his benefit,
Right.
and that's not the purpose.
John
of it.
Kasich actually handled this the right way.
I agree.
Right.
And, you know, he didn't endorse him, and so he's not coming to the convention to draw contrast. To him, the Trump campaign actually egged that on. That was another unforced error.
Let me come at this from a different angle, maybe Mike, either Mike Murphy to start. You know, Donald Trump, one of his biggest problems, if not his biggest problem, is that consistently roughly 60% of those polls say he is not qualified to be president. ABC Washington Post has asked this 4 times in the last year and a half. The total variation has been between 58 and 60% saying no. You don't have this week, and you don't have going forward, these validating voices in the party saying, yes, he is qualified to be president. Is there a cost in simply the contrast between the way his family and friends have talked about him and the way the elected leaders have talked about him has been cavernous in this week? What is there any implication for that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sara that the idea that the establishment has not embraced him underwrites his normal appeal if I'm the guy who's going to blow up the establishment. But all the political calculations being made by all these seasoned politicians who have been around a lot of elections is that this guy's a loser and this guy's anthrax to be too close to. That is a poll in and of itself of experienced consumers of politicians. Politicians act in their own interest, and you can see how they're reacting to Trump. I do believe the narrative of not ready for prime time is killing Trump, and what might be the biggest story isn't Ted Cruz making this showboat move and blowing himself up, but Trump saying he's taking the NATO alliance
Yeah.
as a suggestion.
Yeah.
That could become an enormous issue. If they do not have a speechwriter other than the team of Xerox and Konica tonight working,
The ad guys have all the best lines, don't
you know, we're copywriters, working on some strong NATO language for the speech, even if he has to read it, they're going to be in quicksand on that, because that is enormous. That is bigger than Jerry Ford in Poland. It is huge, and they've got to put that back in the bottle. So I think the narrative that Trump is playing with this whole thing, rather than serious about it, and the lack of any policy depth in the campaign, I think is ultimately going to wipe him out.
I think it's just a missed opportunity. What it is you have a week of infomercials that you could possibly have. It's just a missed opportunity to make his numbers better. His numbers, his favorable numbers are so bad. And granted, hers are awful too. Like, this is a race because both numbers are awful, and this was an opportunity for his numbers to go up a little bit more. And I think it's been missed. But that can all be wiped out if he kills it tonight. And I think that's the thing people have to realize. Like, tonight's really what matters more than anything else. The first 3 nights have been a missed opportunity, but that could change it.
John, tonight, the speech. If you were a part of that team, what do you say to the candidate? The principal is the most important get for
Please
tonight's
read
speech.
as printed would be the first thing I would say. Look, I think there's actually a lot of people out there that honestly want to vote for Donald Trump, but they're scared to at this point, and they want reassurance. And I think if he comes and thinks that this is about prosecuting Hillary Clinton tonight, that's the wrong thing to do. I think Christie did a good job. Rudy Giuliani did a good job. You know, they've heard all this rhetoric from Trump about a new America. People want to know, what is that vision really about? What's it going to look like, and how we're going to get there, and actually get a comfort level that I like this guy, respect this guy, and I can literally see him as president. I mean, look, he's talking to a lot of moderate Republican women. He's talking to a lot of conservatives still, and he's talking to, you know, blue-collar, middle-income families who feel like they've been left on the economic battlefield by both parties, and they want some hope that there really is going to be an American dream. So if it's inspirational, I think it's better.
But when has Trump ever gotten in front of an adoring throng and not talked to the hall, not to outside? I think, does anybody think he's really going to stay on the prompter for the whole speech all the way? He should, but I'll bet money he won't.
I don't even know if there will be a prompter.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's another debate, right?
Yeah.
Well, and Mike, to your
yeah.
point, if you were advised, and this is a difficult question for
Yeah,
you,
I'm
I appreciate
anti-Trump,
it.
so
no, I know.
impossible,
But what do you think needs to be the takeaway as he's walking off stage tonight? If you were in the Trump campaign, say that's the thing we had to achieve, and we got there, or we got nearly there.
In all literature, and politics is another form of storytelling, there is a classic arc, which is we meet the hero faces adversary, the hero overcomes it by changing and growing. This is the first change and grow moment for Donald Trump. I think he's incapable of it. I think he's the atomic clock of one thing, can set to it. But this is a speech where he should stay on prompter, should be elegantly written, and it does not need to be a grievance list. It needs to be what you get from Trump and how Trump has a vision to do the job, not he's mad about Mexican rapists and Hillary Clinton. He gets all the Hillary Clinton problems for free. They're built in. The question is, what's a Trump? And most of all, what can he say to dramatically change the point of view minorities and to an even more important extent, college-educated white women think of him? Because that's the fulcrum of the entire race.
I think also one thing that, like Mike said, he may be incapable of this, but there are a lot of people who are looking for a reason to vote for him because they do not like her, and more importantly, they don't trust her. I think a little humility, I haven't always lived my life like I was running for president, and I recognize that that makes people uncomfortable. And as your leader, I'm going to be an ethical, moral person. I wouldn't put it in those terms exactly, but he should acknowledge that there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with him. There's increasing evidence that he is underperforming in very red states, and that's not over policy. That's over character and over a lot of Christian conservatives, Mormons in Utah and in other Mountain West states who say, I can't get over the braggadocious, I can't get over the multiple moral failures in his past life. I can't get past that. So he's got to also give people a reason to say, okay, he recognizes that that is a problem for him, and he's turning the corner and focused on a way that is going to honor and respect the Oval Office.
Mike DuHaime, weigh in. What does Trump have to achieve tonight?
I don't disagree with the premise. I think he needs to project himself in a contrasting way with her, in a way that projects his strength. And I think he can talk about policy in a way that he hasn't to this point. And I agree. There are certain elements that he already has. I don't think he needs to talk about building the wall and have everybody scream who's going to pay for it. I think he needs to project, an image of strength when it comes to things like foreign policy in places where I think he lacks depth, and maybe show some chops on that he hasn't to this point. And to be likable. One thing he is he, and I think we well found this out in the primary, he's the most charismatic candidate. He was the most charismatic out of the 17. When he walked in the room, there's a reason WWE hired him to be part of their show for a while. He walks in the room, he dominates the room, he's very charismatic, he's very likable, he's very gregarious. If that can come across in a way that plays through the TV screen, I think that will help a lot, because right now, the fundamental thing about winning elections is to be likable and to be more likable than the other person. We haven't had the lesser of the two likable people win since Richard Nixon, right?
Let me follow up with
And she's not very likable.
Let me follow up with taking on something each Mike alluded to. I'm interested in your thought about what is the most meaningful measure of success for this week. Will it be if the horse race tightens, or is it more important that the perceptions of Trump change on favorability, on qualified to be president? 51% of college whites in the ABC Washington Post poll last week said they believe he is biased against women and minorities. Is it more important for him to narrow the race perhaps by driving up Hillary Clinton's negatives, or is this going to be a lost opportunity if he can't change the perceptions about him?
I think perceptions about him. I think fundamentally, because I think the horse race numbers are going to change maybe a little bit after this week, then they'll change again after the Democratic convention, and then they'll settle back in as we get closer to Labor Day. Ultimately, though, if his fave-on-fave numbers are in the 30s, he's not going to win, right? I mean, you can't run the tape. He has to win Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Ohio, and then maybe looking at a combination of some other very difficult states as well. I just don't think that happens. Regardless of how bad her numbers are, they're better than his, and therefore I think those underlying numbers have to change a bit.
Mike, what would you?
Yeah, horse race numbers now are misleading and premature. You only get a couple of big paintbrushes in the campaign to define who you are. This speech and the debates are the biggest ones. He's got to move his numbers because the voters who control the election, the 6 to 7% or the fulcrum voters, Trump, for most of them, is not even on their menu right now to consider. They're mad at Hillary. If you look at the data, they go between undecided and Hillary. They don't go to Trump. So Trump massively has to do something about his numbers. Ballot comes late when you need it. Numbers of what they perceive about you, so they listen to you when you pitch later, are everything. And that's what he could do with this speech if he wasn't Trump. I mean, I keep joking that it's like being Charlie Manson's foxtrot instructor. You go out there, you teach him a few moves, he's doing pretty well, you think, hey, look at that, he can learn the foxtrot. And the next thing you know, he's trying to put a pen in your eye because he's Charlie Manson. So the real test for me will be, can Trump do anything different in the most important speech he's given so far in his life?
Sara,
That's
I
the
want
question.
to ask you something about how politicians and strategists deal with something that they're not expecting. I just want to ask you what you think would be going on in Hillary Clinton's campaign watching this convention, and do you think there will be any rearranging or adapting their convention to play off anything they saw or didn't see this week?
Well, she in some respects has the same challenge Donald Trump has, which is she has to improve her, she does have the same challenge, which is she has to improve her favorability numbers. I don't think that they will adapt. I think, she has to put definition around who she is as a person. Now, remember, her numbers were quite high when she was a senator and during most of her tenure as Secretary of State. And then when she's a candidate, they fall to the bottom. People remember the Clinton scandals, the difficulty around all Clinton politics. So she's been high before nationally, and so which implies to me that she can get some of this back, move beyond this email scandal. So I think you're going to see them really tell the story of Hillary Clinton, humble beginnings. She's a fighter. She's stuck in a very difficult situation personally and triumphed.
But nothing in particular to take advantage of.
I don't think that they need to. I think that Trump has been handing her the biggest political gift of her life every single day, and this week has been no different. She should not win this election with her numbers. If any one of the other individuals on that stage, less perhaps Ben Carson, we'd be having a very different conversation right now about this race. Any one of them.
Mike, anything to take advantage of?
No, I agree. They got to fix Hillary, but very quickly, I'd say there is one little nugget that's kind of interesting. The evangelical world is changing, and there's kind of a growth in less politically conservative evangelicals. There's some dog whistles I think they could blow because there are these character concerns about Trump, which I think would help them.
I think what's going to be interesting next week is you will have Bill Clinton and Barack Obama speak for her, and they will be phenomenal, right? They will be fantastic. And in some ways, that will be great for her because they will tell her story better than she will be able to tell it herself, and they will be very well received, and they will be very good speeches, maybe better than anything we've seen here. They will be headline speeches, and then she will go Thursday night, and they'll be like, she's not really.
But I would just point out the
really
contrast.
And we won't have a Ted Cruz
that will hurt
Bernie
in a
The
way.
contrast between Barack Obama and Bill Clinton doing that on the one hand, and him needing Donald Trump Jr. to do that here, because other than Chris Christie, there really hasn't been anybody of that stature in the party.
We only have one person of that stature, and it's President
Right.
Bush, 43. He's
Right.
the only
He's not-
person of
he's
that
not here.
stature in the party.
And
He's not
he
here.
won't. He was not here.
But to Mike's point, we could see her spend a little more time on her opponent than a typical nominee would spend in his acceptance speech. And if he doesn't properly kick this NATO issue down, not to mention other foreign policy gaffes he's made, you could see her spend a disproportionate time on Donald Trump and his fitness for office. I think the speech she gave in California that defined him was the most effective speech she gave of this cycle. She started to bounce up again after that speech. So, maybe to put a finer point on your question, Garrett, that she will spend more time on Donald Trump than perhaps she would have otherwise.
Yeah, their whole convention is going to be about making sure Donald Trump fails the cocktail party test. And that is where, college-educated, moderate, oftentimes Republican women cannot go out with their friends and say, yes, I'm voting for Donald Trump. I mean, if you look at, they can win the collar counties of Philadelphia and get some Republican votes there. They can win in Northern Virginia. That's all they got to do in some of these places is to motivate some women who would have voted for Romney but cannot vote for Trump to now vote for Clinton, and probably the ball game's over.
Yeah, no,
And so Hillary at her convention will try to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, what she's going to make sure is that she's fine, but she's going to make it that Donald Trump is toxic among that audience.
And in fact, if you talk to the Priorities USA, and Major has led us into a segue into the second half of our conversation, previewing the general election, so thank you for that. If you talk to Priorities USA, they will acknowledge that their principal goal at this point is exactly that, to have Trump fail the cocktail party test with college-educated whites. They will say that by far the most effective ad has been the campaign has been the Grace ad of the young parent, the parents of the young woman, the daughter with spina bifida, saying how shocked they were about Trump mocking the disabled. When you look at the kind of the overall structure of the electorate, Mike, what are the biggest hurdles Trump has to get over to truly get in the game?
Yeah, let me just quickly address the convention question, because I think the Clinton people are probably, they thought it through, but they're looking, after this NATO thing, you're going to see a lot more national security than you normally do at a Democratic convention. There's going to be a choir there of retired military flag officers and Brent Scowcroft and
Could
other
you see
people.
Scowcroft? Do you think you'll see Scowcroft?
You could now. I bet the call went out because they're going to, in the campaigns, when there's an opening in the other side on a big thing, you pour through it. And you can see
Like
the
the
choir
Fulda
of
Gap.
brass. Yeah. And so there's an opportunity there. I think we'll see a lot more than that than usual. And I agree on the white wine attack, too. That'll totally be a key part of it. And the general election is pretty simple. 30% of the vote's going to be votes that we Republicans don't compete well with. African Americans, Latinos, and mixed race. The young vote is even larger in that percentage. So Trump's theory is I'm going to max out the 70% Caucasian vote up to the moon, but Bernie Sanders and other white liberals are not voting for Donald Trump. So their targeting is very much at college-educated voters. We see it in the data, particularly college-educated white women, who Trump, by his natural style, repeatedly offends. So that's why I think you need to see the character of Trump grow in this speech and begin some new stuff, or he's going to get boxed in on the map.
John, you wrote yesterday in the Wall Street Journal a piece titled Trump's Best Path to Victory. You didn't predict victory, but you said that this is the way he would probably have to get it if he can get there. What does that look like?
Well, I think, first of all, we all have to do a paradigm shift. This is Donald Trump. He's not the quintessential candidate. We always have these filters. We've been trained to think, here's how you win. And how that would be is to say, you build off what Romney started, and then you add places like Colorado and Virginia or other places where it was close and all this stuff. I don't think Trump can do well in some of those states. And so the margin of error is so small for Trump that, first of all, you do have to win pretty much every state Romney won. You almost have to start there or you're already in trouble. That's why we're seeing the Democrats play a lot in places like North Carolina now. The second thing is, the paradox of Trump is, while he loses some moderate white votes, what he's picking up is what I'm calling the sons and daughters of Reagan Democrats, who are people who are, yes, angry, feel mad at both parties, and they like the fact that Donald Trump makes mistakes because that means he's authentic and he's really going to change things. He's not only got to pick those up, but he has to still give a comfort level to those Romney voters, and that's where the real challenge of their campaign comes in.
Mike, you have a lot of your Jersey, you have a lot of those white college-educated suburban voters. Is Donald Trump at risk of losing one of them for every son and daughter of a Reagan Democrat that he wins?
Yes, I mean, I think certainly the message that he's put out thus far has made people uncomfortable. As John said, it's a great way to describe it, just a discomfort with him in terms of his rhetoric and his messaging. That's why maybe there's a chance to pivot from that. I think some of them are lost for good, but I don't know forever. But I do think you look at the collar counties around Philadelphia. If you lose those 4 counties and then you lose Philadelphia by 400,000 votes, it's over. It does not matter what you do in the rest of the state. It absolutely doesn't matter. So he does need to come back there. I'm not exactly sure how he does it, other than, I mean, he also had the opportunity to be potentially the most centrist candidate we've ever had. Essentially a moderate Republican from New York who at the end of the primary was saying Planned Parenthood does some good things or parts of Obamacare that are good. He had an opportunity to pivot to the center like no candidate we've had in a long time, but he's chosen not to do it.
I think for him
that's a
now
very
the key.
big point.
Yeah, I think that now the key for Donald Trump, or what I would be looking at if I was on the inside of the Trump operation, is given where his numbers are, given where Mrs. Clinton's numbers are, given that neither are likely to change dramatically in the next month, I might be trying to get Gary Johnson on the debate stage, because I don't believe Donald Trump can get to 50% of the vote in this country. But he can get to 42, 43% of the vote. And if there is a movement toward a third-party candidate, albeit a former Republican governor, one who takes pretty liberal positions on issues, that may be the best path for them to be successful.
Do you think Trump wants to take more time away from him on stage?
It's a great question. It's a great question. But if you're trying to win, they've got to think outside the box at this point.
As Bill Clinton will tell you, 43% works.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let me talk to you about something that I witnessed last night on the floor. I was in the Ohio delegation, standing right next to it, and the Pennsylvania delegation was right in front. And these are 2 swing states, and we have a very intimate story playing out here at this convention about Ohio. The Pennsylvania delegates during the Penn speech were going up and down like piston rods, applauding, applauding, applauding. Everyone in the Ohio delegation looked like their seats were equipped with seatbelts. Dead flat. When Pence talked about his mom, they applauded. When he talked about his Marine son, they applauded. But other than that, they were not there. How much does this dynamic between Kasich and Trump affect what we're talking about in a swing state in the general election?
I think it matters. I think it matters. On that front, though, I would say all the Pennsylvania delegates are Trump people. Trump won all 67 counties. I was talking to Pennsylvania people who've come to every single convention for the last half dozen conventions. They don't know any of the delegates. It's the first time they're all.
A lot of first-timers.
Whereas Kasich won Ohio, so they're Kasich people, and they're playing that out. But in a state like Ohio, where you're gonna, it's going to be very close. If you win,
and the appeals are going to be the same in both those states. It seems. Having a back and forth in a negative way with a popular incumbent governor of a state that you need. Now, granted, the Kasich team was not entirely helpful to Romney. If you asked the Romney team, it didn't bubble over like this, but they were not entirely, in sync with the Romney organization last time. But to have it bubble over like this is a mistake. It's just like everything else we've talked about in the first 3 days of the convention. The fact that we're even still talking about it is problematic. I think not being a sore winner is an important thing in politics. As the winner, it's your job to unite the party, and he hasn't done that, and these are part of the ramifications. It wouldn't matter in another state. I think in Ohio, where if you're going to win, it's going to be by 1 point. It matters.
If he doesn't win Ohio, he's done.
Right.
There's no, because you're not
But I
going to win
wanna-
Pennsylvania and not win Ohio.
That's right.
It's
Absolutely.
impossible.
I fundamentally agree, but I think that narrative has more to do with the cocktail party, he's being bad to Kasich, those narrow swing voters. Because a little dirty secret of this business is our entire Republican primary election system is designed to make sure those delegates are not a very good microcosm of the voters in those states in a general election. So, there's a little bit of a card trick with all that. But the narrative the media picks up of, the Ohio delegates are offended, does have some resonance in kind of the cocktail party factor that
Let's talk about the path, because we talked about the Electoral College. Let me try to put it in a little more structural terms. I mean, we now have 2 groups of swing states, essentially, in the U.S. We have a Rust Belt group of swing states, Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. New Hampshire's geographically different, but demographically similar. They're older, predominantly white, heavily blue-collar. Then we have the Sun Belt now, group of swing states, which used to be more Republican, but in this century really have become truly purple, and that's Virginia, North Carolina, Florida in the southeast, Colorado, and Nevada in the southwest. Today, Trump is polling better, not surprisingly given his strength among blue-collar whites, in that Rust Belt set of swing states. And when NBC Marist did the Sun Belt, they had almost exactly the same result. I mean, basically 44-35 in all of them. How would you assess his standing in each of those? And can he win the White House just by running through the Rust Belt if he can't compete in the more diverse, younger, more college white Sun Belt? Mike?
I don't believe he can just ignore that. I mean, we haven't won, many of the states you mentioned, we haven't won since 1988. Right? So I don't believe where you have a candidate who's right now in the 30s in his favorable ratings, as much as he does have an ability, and there are issues around trade from a policy point of view, where clearly some Democrats are uncomfortable, as Bernie Sanders' success in Michigan showed. I don't believe that fundamentally we can lose states like Florida and North Carolina, that President Bush won, Mitt Romney won some of them, and somehow we're going to turn around states that we haven't won since the 1980s. I mean, it's been a long time, and we've come close. President Bush, 43, lost Pennsylvania by only 2 points. Like, we've come close a few times in those, but we haven't won them. I don't think we're going to shift them all at one time, and somehow it's going to be absent a major shift nationally.
Short of a third-party candidacy. I mean, the way your scenario plays out is you look at the millennials, and they're now larger than the baby boomers, and they are predominantly in those cities and on the coasts and not in the Rust Belt, and so they're the most distrustful of institutions. They're the least partisan. They don't like either party, and they're more likely to go support a third-party candidate. So that would be the only way, in my view, that could play out.
The biggest potential national thing I think that could happen could be a change in the turnout model, because we've had successive record turnouts since September 11th, 2004, 2008, 2012. First September 11th, President Bush and what was going on there, and then President Obama inspired people and brought more people out to vote. The numbers of both candidates, but especially her numbers, could keep some Democrat numbers down in a way that maybe don't get picked up in the polling. But I think for the first time, this millennium, we are going to see, turnout actually go down from one presidential election to the next, and that could have a way of changing things across the board.
Yeah, there's a myth about Midwestern swing states. Wisconsin has been a Republican dream for a long time, and occasionally we get lucky with a governor or senator, but in presidential elections it's been tough. My home state of Michigan, it has been a long time in presidential elections. And part of the myth is that, there's this big blue-collar, white, Archie Bunker, though nobody says that, workforce that Trump's going to resonate with. And the truth is, you look at the auto industry now, it's smaller, and the manufacturing is a lot more high-tech. So the kind of Michigan stereotype of those Reagan Democrats in Macomb County, those numbers have shrunk. And so even if you super perform with those, there are more pharmaceutical research scientists in Ann Arbor working for Pfizer than there are machinists working for the tank plant in Warren, which actually.
Do you have a different view? You might have a different view.
It's a phony equation in many ways.
I think we got to keep something in mind. Donald Trump won the nomination, and he kicked everybody's butts. And these were very, very qualified, well-funded people. And to me, that signals there's something going on out there. And if he can turn this actually into a movement, I mean, look, he didn't win by hypnosis. People actually turned out and voted. As Mike said, he won all 67 counties in Pennsylvania, which is a parochial state, but not a homogeneous state. And so if he can catch some fire here, where there's enough people who are frustrated, angered, we could see a turnout that is just completely different than we've ever seen before. There could be a closet vote for Trump that is not going to show up on polls. And the only way he's going to win is to have a map that looks different. And I personally believe, without winning Ohio for sure, probably Pennsylvania, and then probably Florida, I think winning all those western states is too big of a lift. And frankly, if he's struggling with some of those red states like Arizona and others, he's done anyhow, because that means he's going to be struggling with those same type of voters in Ohio and in Pennsylvania and so forth.
And I'll just interject. The problem with the primary analogy, where I agree he broke the mold with under 50% of the vote, but in a multi-way election, is every year the Republican primary electorate becomes more different than the general election electorate. It's 28 million cranky old white guys like Mike Murphy, not 128 million people full of millennials and minorities. So Trump's got to grow a little bit beyond his superpower from the primaries.
Presidential elections occur in an atmosphere, a collective mindset sometimes, and outside events can shape what that collective mindset is and create a surprising result. Is there anything, let's say, on the issue of terrorism or security, a great number of attacks or frequencies, but a horrible month of June? Is there anything that you think could affect the collective mindset of the country that is an external event that could change some of these evaluations of the limitations that Trump faces in this election?
I'll take a quick crack at it. I was at this dinner where I showed up late And I was next to this distinguished elder gentleman with kind of a strange foreign accent was saying, what about a peristyle attack 8 days before the election in Atlanta and Chicago, Illinois kills 100 Americans? Couldn't that be the big black swan? I said, yeah, maybe. You never know. You know, you can't predict that kind of thing. Maybe they want steady. Maybe they want, you know, beat the hell out of them, and that's Trump. But, you know, I think that's kind of a premature. So when I got done laughing, the guy was introduced, he got up, it was the head of the Mossad. So I'm not going to Chicago or Atlanta for next year. But you don't know. You don't know.
I think, you know, if you think about presidential campaigns, here to now, they've always been decided on attributes. Typically, you know, ultimately the person who voters perceive to care the most about them and people like them. But strong leader over the course of presidential campaign history has also been a very strong attribute, and it's one that Donald Trump is winning right now. And you take that and you couple it with some interesting ways pollsters are now asking questions, which is, you know, in terms of these attributes, do you find and issues, do you find this person, you know, acceptable? You know, is Donald Trump acceptable? Is Hillary Clinton acceptable? Is neither acceptable? And there's a large group of voters, you know, pushing 30% in most cases, that say neither one of these candidates, you know, is qualified to serve as the president, is trustworthy on these issues. Pick it. There's a huge block of them. A lot of them aren't going to show up, but some of them are. And they don't like either, and they think neither are qualified, but they're going to vote for somebody,
Right.
the ones that show up. And in your scenario, I think they run to the strong leader.
And John, to refine the question, because you brought the cocktail party litmus test up, does security and concerns about that in some cases possibly crack through that maybe? I don't know.
I think it does, and I actually think it probably favors Trump in this way. I think that a lot of the voters he's talking to feels like America's been getting their sand kicked in their face for the last 8 years, and they're tired of it. And I think they've felt like we've lost respect. But I want to go back to something Mike Murphy said, because I think this is critical. He mentioned how Trump did well among primary voters, but the general election is completely different. If there was one piece of either advice or criticism I do have of the Trump campaign, I'm not sure they figured that out yet.
Yeah. It feels to me like the primary is still going on in the convention right now.
Right.
With all the messaging.
You know, it's worth noting that even in the primary, while Trump won almost exactly half of non-college Republicans, even in the primary, only won 35% of the college Republicans. So this idea of resistance. Let's bring in the audience for some questions, and Major and I'll take it back for some final thoughts. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. There's one in the back over here, if we can get to them. There we go. And just identify yourself, please.
My name's Daniel Freeman. I'm from the UK. I'm from the UK. Obviously, the Brexit vote threw the establishment quite dramatically. Is this a real protest that's happening in America, that people are really looking at the establishment and saying they don't want the same old as the past?
I think we're gonna find that out. Certainly, the Republican primary voters have spoken. I mean, nothing that Donald Trump said that was offensive or outside the norm supplanted the major fact that he was the only one up there who wasn't a politician, and they wanted somebody who wasn't part of governing. They wanted to throw him out. You know, the interesting thing about Brexit vote, I think is interesting. I spoke to some pollsters who'd worked on the race there, who had said, you know, one of the things that they found were people who hadn't voted in decades voted. And so that wasn't part of the polling that they had looked at, and that's part of what was missed was this you know, influx of new voters. I don't know that we're going to see that this time, but it's the one thing that maybe is out there as an X factor.
Can I add one point, which is that one key difference is that the electorate in Britain was 90% white. And if you look at the share of white voters in Britain who voted to leave, according to Lord Ashcroft's polling, it was 53%. 53% responded to the kind of anti-global, anti-immigrant message. If Donald Trump wins 53% of whites in the U.S., he will lose by a landslide. Right. That's the challenge. And if you look at the maps of who voted to remain, kind of from London going down, I guess, to the south, you know, kind of a white collar, that is exactly, as Mike was talking before, that's Northern Virginia, that's the suburbs of Denver, that's the suburbs of Philadelphia, and that's the challenge. I think it is exactly the same challenge, probably the same coalitions, just they exist in very different proportions in the U.S. than in the UK, which is, you know, a much more homogenous, racially homogenous.
Yeah, we're more structurally locked in vote. There's definitely the same hunger to punish the establishment and the status quo. It's what we call a wrong track election. People want new. That's why you're hearing the Trump campaign finally and appropriately talk about change. But it's not as clean, and we don't have to deal with the French on a daily basis.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Ron. Good morning, panelists. Sean Miller with Campaigns Elections. Just a quick question for you. We've heard this from a few strategists talking about the videos that have been played at the convention. Some folks have said there hasn't really been those traditional bio videos that get the crowd pumped up, but also folks at home get to see. We saw a few of those last night, and so I was wondering if you guys could just weigh in on that. This is supposed to be the made-for-television convention. We've got the reality TV candidate. Were you surprised that there hasn't been more videos, better videos seen at this convention?
Well, I just don't think the infrastructure exists in this operation to think about those. That takes a long time to put something like that together, and it requires usually a team of very talented people. And they're still catching their breath every single day. They're still sprinting from the primary. So I think that was not intentional. It's just that it never got around to it, as I suspect. You'll see a lot of that at the Democratic convention. And when Major asked that question, that's immediately what I was thinking of is they're going to have the most beautiful produced, 10-minute infomercial
Where's
of Hillary
Harry
Clinton's
Thomas
life.
when
And
you-
all right. I mean, it's going to be.
It goes to an infrastructure question, as Sara said. I mean, in a national general election campaign, it is an enormous business that I think people, and there are certain disciplines within that business, have to go with. The ad people are just worried about the ads, and just do the ads, and do your thing, look at the poll and look at the ads, and just do that. And the guy who's running the phone bank in Westmoreland County,
Right.
Pennsylvania, your job is to just run that phone bank. Don't worry about anything else. Right now, I think they're just spread too thin. There aren't, I think they're trying, the professional staff. I just think there's not enough.
Yeah, I'd even say this. I've done a lot of those videos, and I thought sometimes they were brilliant, and they meant nothing. I mean, to be honest with you, there's only a few events that really matter.
Wow, that's a pretty big statement from an ad guy.
Well, but it's true.
I think your videos are great.
Yeah, but I'm serious. Nobody's talking about those the next morning, and that's what this all comes down to.
Yeah, let me echo that as another ad guy. I agree. I think the videos were overplayed, but there was an opportunity to do more digital streaming. I would add a GoPro camera backstage, not the real
What
backstage,
could go
by
wrong?
the way,
Yeah.
where they get the players out to handle the delegations on Monday afternoon. But there could have been more. This is the world of, we're in a culture now of unfiltered reality media, and they could have fed that more, and I think they had a lot of opportunities to, and my guess is the Dems will and be good at it.
Thanks very much. David Paul, Huffington Post. I was curious watching the Trump boys' speeches. The first one was the speech that conservatives wanted to hear. The second one was the speech that actually reflected what his father said. And if given by his father as his acceptance speech, I think would take him a long way towards changing the shift of people who might consider voting for him. But there's an odd aspect of all of this that I think is reflected in the notion that if there's a terrorist attack, people flock to strength, which is he has said so many things, from paying down the national debt in 8 years, to rebuilding the space program, to everything else that's come along the way, the best schools, the best infrastructure, and all of this. Yet there is never a question of how is this more than just words? Because Bernie Sanders proposes a $57 billion entitlement, and everybody wants to know how he's going to pay for it. The total cost of what Trump has proposed is probably in the range of $40 trillion.
Yeah, interesting. Are these kind of questions he might face in the debate if he doesn't face before?
Oh, I think so, yeah. I mean, and on the strength thing, people flock to strength, but they also run from fear, and as Barry Goldwater would tell you. So that's the Clinton campaign will spend a lot of time turning Trump's strength into risk. And whether if they succeed or not in that will be a huge driver of what happens to Trump, I think.
And I think that is baking into his numbers. Some of those questions are out there, they're real, and I think voters, sometimes we don't give voters enough credit. I mean, voters can see through this and are pretty smart and pay attention to this. And I think some of those questions are out there. There's just so many other questions that, one of the things about Trump, it's like, he throws a lot of chum in the water. And I think as reporters probably writing his speeches, you're reporting, you probably say, okay, that's the one I'm going to go about. Oh, then it changes 4 or 5 times throughout. I think there's so much out there, and I think that's intentional by them as well. It keeps people kind of off guard and certainly not attacking any one thing.
Let me, Major and I, maybe, we got one more. Let's do one more, and then we'll take it back for final question each.
Hello, my name's Colin Marazzi. I'm a student at the University of Akron. I want to hit the fast forward button real quick and move to 2020.
Ted Cruz.
that
Why
Cruz
not?
supporter.
say Hillary wins with 95% of the African American vote and over 75% of the Hispanic vote, what does the GOP do to kind of recognize these trends and adapt their platform and their kind of game plan moving forward? What can they do?
It's up to, in my opinion, it's up to elected officials or elected leaders. You can't fix these during campaigns. You fix these when elected leaders go into places where it's difficult for them to go to. You fix this when governors and senators and mayors go into African-American communities, go into Hispanic communities where maybe they got 10% of the vote and see if they can get 15% of the vote next time. People don't vote for the party, they vote for individuals. And until we have individuals that compete in cities, compete in Democrat areas, and try to win in those areas, we will lose nationally. We have to do that. And the primary system, by the way, as Mike said before, kind of caters to a different group. We have to have people who can come through the primary system and who've done it, but it has to be built around individuals, not necessarily, a picture of an elephant.
Yeah, our incentives in the party are to do the exact wrong thing on demography. We've got demographic cataracts. I wrote something for Time magazine in 2008 called The Coming Republican Ice Age, because it's very hard to get a party to act in its long-term right interest when the short-term incentives are to do the opposite. So I'm for superdelegates. I want less primaries, more smart people picking a damn nominee so we win. I'm very anti-small d Democratic on that. If it hadn't been for superdelegates, I think we could very well have had the ultimate political science experiment this year, Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And second, I fear that when it came down to just Cruz, and I'm not a Cruz fan, I was for Cruz, because I wanted to have the Cruz science experiment as nominee rather than Trump. Because Cruz's argument is there are millions of missing voters who are going to show up if we nominate a real conservative. Now what we could very well have is we can argue the Trump case, and if we lose, we might wind up, though I'm less certain of this after what Cruz just did, arguing the Cruz argument again and give her 8 years.
In close primaries in 2020.
Right,
By
exactly.
rule changes that they're
because
already
parties
pushing.
tend to close in, which is exactly the opposite. You want to know about a party, look at the organic media that the primary voters gravitate to. With the Democrats, it's this fad called the interweb. With us, it's AM radio, which isn't going to be around in 5 years. So we've got to break that cycle or we're really in trouble.
Let me say that actually sets up the final question I wanted to ask, and the Major, I'm sure, has a final question as well, which is, you've talked about the possibility that Trump, he could get a surge of new voters, he could max out on white voters, but given the underlying demography in the party, is his path a sustainable long-term one for the GOP, and is it a greater risk to the GOP if he loses or if he wins and actually tries to implement the agenda that he ran on, things like deporting 11 million people? What would you worry about more for the long-term future of the party, that he loses or that he wins?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's one many Republicans are struggling with because on the one hand, he is our nominee, and we don't want Hillary Clinton, and if you believe it's a binary choice, that means you need to support Donald Trump. On the other hand, as you point out, what's worse? Do you go in for the minor medical procedure right now and suffer a week of discomfort, or do you let the cancer grow for 25 years? And I think that is the choice most Republicans face, unless he dramatically changes the trajectory of his commentary and the way he's run his campaign.
See, my bigger fear is the brand of the Republican Party is that we follow the same model we used to. We assume 18 to 21-year-olds pretty much aren't going to show up and vote, and then they're going to be Democrat for a while, and someday they're going to pay taxes, and boy, we got them. And all that has changed because of the way news is distributed. By the time they're 16, they're actually relatively politically savvy. By the time they're 18, they're not only activists, but their brand is set of who we are or who we aren't. And I think if we're going to grow as a party, and particularly win back presidential elections, we better start thinking about how we're going to talk to younger voters instead of saying we're going to wait till they pay more in taxes.
And we take terrible lessons from off-year elections. I mean, we take terrible lessons from
do.
2010 and 2014. Boy, woo, we a great party. Like, say, hey, look at Wisconsin. We got a U.S. senator, a governor, we got both houses of legislature, and then that's not going to happen in the general election in a presidential year. We take bad lessons from those and pat ourselves on the back too much for those. We have to change as a party long term.
So Reince Priebus, the RNC chairman, has said this party is well organized to win off-year elections, poorly organized to win presidential elections. So, picking up on this question here, if in fact Hillary Clinton loses and it's up to Republican leaders to deal with the smoldering ruins, how many will be left? Does a Trump campaign and a defeat jeopardize the Senate and even the House?
I think there was a really good chance of losing the Senate no matter who the nominee was. As I just said, we won this Senate in 2010, essentially. We were winning states like Wisconsin, Florida, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. Those are difficult at best, no matter who the Republican nominee is at presidential year. So what will be left, we'll have a lot of governors left, but it'll be okay. We have to look forward to the next generation. That'll be okay.
Yeah, I'm for Trump. I think Trump's going to lose, and I'm okay with that. Smoldering ruins, then we rebuild a new competitive Republican modern party that we've needed for a decade. So I think that's the better.
How many are left
thing.
to do that?
Well, you know, the best thing and the worst thing that happened to the Toyota motor factories was World War II. So that just may be where we are. We're going to have to restart and go. Now, to your down ballot question really quick, I agree, but there's one thing that's kind of interesting. If you look at history, we're supposed to get wiped out in the Senate. We got vulnerable guys in Democratic seats in the presidential year. That is as bad as it can get. But Trump is such an outlier, and so many people in the Senate are being allowed to send very clear dog whistles that, you know, I'm not really for him. They've got a little more moving room. I'm involved in an IE in Illinois where Mark Kirk's got a very tough race. He's doing kind of okay right now, and Toomey in Pennsylvania is doing even better. So
Portman here in Ohio?
Yeah, Portman here in Ohio. They're all tough races, and if you look at history, they're supposed to lose, but they're showing a little more life because I think the fact that they're allowed to be a little distant from Trump may give them a little running room, and people are going to want to counterbalance to the awful idea of.
And I would just say one thing. I said Republicans take bad lessons from off-year elections. Democrats take bad lessons from presidential elections.
Yeah.
Even if Hillary Clinton wins, you know, every state, we will have a majority in the House, potentially a majority in the Senate, or if not very close, and probably 30 Republican governors.
And
like
state
the party will be
legislatures.
pretty healthy.
But to your question, you know, it only takes one really good nominee to start on that rebuilding process.
That's right.
And so the biggest challenge for the Republicans is that we've not had a leader of our party for 8 years.
That's right.
And when we have a nominee which we do today, albeit a very different one, 8 years from now, 4 years from now, whatever it may be, we will have, I think, a very different nominee. And that, you know, particularly if it's younger, dynamic, more modern, as Mike says, we will turn the corner.
And Trump will fade fast. He'll be Dukakis if he loses. It'll be 6 months and poof.
To Mike DuHaime's point, you could say that American politics can be described in two sentences. Democrats cannot win enough white voters to consistently win the House, and Republicans cannot win enough non-white voters to consistently win the White House. And, you know, that's pretty much the summary at this point. This has been an incredibly great, engaging conversation. We could keep going all day, but I think we've got to let these terrific strategists and minds get on with their day. Thank you to Major for joining you. Thank you for joining us this morning. And just one programming note, we have more for you today. We'll have a wonderful conversation over lunch at 12:30 this afternoon. We are talking women in politics and what can be done to make a career in public office more appealing and attainable for young women. Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, Ohio State Representative Sara, Christina Hagen, and more. If you can, come back, and thank you for joining us this morning.